recording. Okay, so Erev Tov, everyone. We had 2 shiurim until now. I would say that the main point that we've been working on, and we will continue working on today, as I expressed in the question in the message that's sent out inviting people to the shiur, is why it seems that the question of proof of the existence of, not that I know what God is, but of a God, kind of manages to escape us, and it's such an evasive question. And the main answer, or the main attitude that I'm trying to project, is that is because God is great and is beyond our comprehension. And the main point I'm trying to make is that it's not a weakness of Emunah, it's a strength of Emunah. We cannot know God, we cannot prove God, because it's beyond some kind of rationale that we understand. And instead of thinking of this as a weakness, I am thinking of this, I relate to this as a strength. And then I think I ended 2 weeks ago with a question: is this situation frustrating, or is it possibly inspiring? Do you can experience it as something which is frustrating? I would really like to be strong in my faith, in my emunah, and have a clear vision of what emunah is, what I believe in. And I'm frustrated that you're telling me that I can live 120 years and keep on researching it, and I won't find a definite and final answer. One of the things we saw 2 weeks ago was the Rambam with his simile about the different people who are seeking the king in his palace. Some are far away, some are closer, some are moving in the right direction, some are not moving in the right direction, in the wrong direction. And the point was that it's an ongoing, lifelong project. Emunah is not a mitzvah that you are yotze. You perform the mitzvah at a certain moment, and you've performed the mitzvah. You can check. Emunah did that. Let's move on to the next one. Emunah is an ongoing, lifelong project. So again, is that frustrating or inspiring? It's open. I believe it's open-ended. It's up to us. Do I want to relate to it as something which is an inspiration, or something that causes me frustration? I like to compare it to marriage, to love. I can think of it as it's frustrating. You never really remain one. You can try to be one, you can connect, you can unite, you can be close to one another, but you always stay 2 separate people. But that's the beauty of it, that you stay 2 separate people, but you can constantly come together again. You can constantly bring those 2 people to be close together. So the same with Hashem, it's not something that you finalize, it's done, you close the file and put it away in your files. It's something that you can always come back to, always grow, always find more inspiration and more depth in it. And I wouldn't say that it has to be, I'm not claiming that it's the right answer. It's an inspiration, not a frustration. If it frustrates you, you are wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that I believe that a lot of it is up to us. How do we react to the difficulty of having a clear vision of our emunah? Do we react to it as a frustration or as an inspiration? I believe that's very much up to us. I want to mention, I don't remember if I mentioned this 2 weeks ago. I don't think so. Harav Yaakov Nagen, who is a friend of mine, a friend of ours, he was a guest in Kinol David some years ago. When he was in his younger years, not that he's an old man now, he's younger than me, but in his younger years, he spent quite some time in India studying and being acquainted with Eastern religions and with spiritual things going on in India. He has a very interesting book about Parshat Shavua, which compares constantly East and West, compares being and doing. East is being, the Western world is doing, and he looks for that in every Parashat Shavua. And he tells a story that in one of his visits in an ashram in India, he asked the Swami, who is a Hindu, about their statues, which is forbidden in Yahadut, of course. He asked him, does he think that Hinduism will ever be able to exist without statues? And the Swami's answer was no, negative, because without the statues, the people will not be able to find Kirvat Elohim, not be able to be close to their God. They need something tangible in order to be close to God. And I think that's a fascinating expression of why we need tangible external things. Now, Yahadut considers this to be very dangerous. If I make a statue of God, then I am bringing God down into something physical. But on the other hand, isn't it true that we need something tangible? So the Jewish answer to this question, is mitzvot. Mitzvot are tangible. We don't only have spiritual faith. We have actions. Our faith demands that we carry out actions. And in this way, we make it tangible. And we dance with a Sefer Torah, and we kiss it, and we read from it, and we hold a lulav, and we make kiddush, and we do all these tangible, we give tzedakah as well. We have these tangible physical actions that we take, and that is supposed to give us our need. We are physical beings, and we have a need to express or to experience our emunah in a physical way, and mitzvot give that to us. Of course, mitzvot are also a two-edged sword, meaning we can focus on the action and forget the spirituality, and that's not the point, which brought Christianity to reject the practicality of mitzvot, b'diuk for that reason, because it seemed to them that it was making the religion too physical and not spiritual. So let's focus on spirituality. But they couldn't focus on spirituality either. They needed something physical. So what ended up happening is that they don't have physical mitzvot. They only have a physical God, the Son of God. So I'd rather have physical actions than a physical God. But it is an ongoing challenge, and we always have to have the right balance. I'd like to go back to the Parashat Shavua that we read this past Shabbat, and to Akedat Yitzchak. And Rav Kook writes a very interesting comment on Akedat Yitzchak. And he says that the point of Akedat Yitzchak was to say the following. Avraham was going around the world teaching spiritual faith. No idols, no statues. And it seemed, just like the Swami in India said, we can't have devotion to God if we don't have something tangible. And the point of Akedat Yitzchak was to show that even if you have a spiritual God, without any physical expression of the God that you believe in, without seeing this God physically, nonetheless, you can be so devoted to this God that you are willing to make such a great sacrifice as Akedat Yitzchak for the God, saying that we don't need statues and idols, and we can still have devotion and connection with our God. Also an interesting point, and it's food for thought for all of us. What gives us our devotion? But we do need something to give us that devotion, and I'll get back to that as we go along today. And I'd like to mention now some questions, Leslie, that you raised in the email. I'm not going to answer them all now, but I do want to raise them, and they will be part of the discussion. One question you raised was about the Rambam that we quoted 2 weeks ago, because the beginning of the Rambam was where the Rambam spoke about people who are far away from the king in the palace in the Simul. And the Rambam said these are people who have no religion, and they are below mankind, but above monkeys. Okay, he saw them as less than human beings, more than monkeys. That's, we'll be nice to them. We're not going to compare them to monkeys. And Leslie was saying this is very degrading. And if I brought this to children or to grown-ups in the world today, they would turn their backs to the Rambam and walk away. And so this does not strengthen faith using this kind of language. And I must say, Leslie, I quite a lot agree with you. If a rabbi today were to speak that way about non-religious people or something like that, non-believers, I think we should mention Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, and I sent the WhatsApp. I hope you all saw the WhatsApp that I sent today. 1.5 minute WhatsApp. If you haven't seen it, fascinating point he makes exactly about things we're going to discuss. And there's a lot to say about Rabbi Sachs and his teachings on Emunah. But one of the things he taught very firmly was be devout and cling to your faith and be faithful to your faith, but be respectful of other people, of all people, and bring a blessing from our faith to the world. Don't fight wars with other faiths, with other beliefs, with other people, or with people without faith, but bring a blessing from our faith to them, and that we'll come back to that again and again. So rabbis who are degrading and speak ill of other people and in a disrespectful way definitely causes damage. I think it's unfair to judge the Rambam 850 years ago based on today's norms in that sense, writing a philosophical book meant for individuals. But clearly, you're absolutely right, Leslie. If I was going to bring a shiur and bring this source to a group that is farther away from faith, like you expressed it, we are people of faith and we have our challenges. We want to discuss them and deal with them. But to bring it to people I'm trying to convince of faith, yes, I would have censored that sentence in the Rambam. I don't think I would have not brought the Rambam, but maybe I would have censored those words. Or if I was sitting with them in a group, I could bring those words and discuss them and say that certainly is not a way to speak today. But I agree that that's also a significant point. Another point you made was about using the term king, the simile and the parable of a king. What is a king to us today? A king to us today, you spoke about fairy tales. There are kings and queens and princes and princesses in fairy tales. What does a king mean to us today? And what does it mean when we speak about a king so powerfully and so in such a central way on Rosh Hashanah and Yamim Noraim? Ilana, I don't know if you remember, some years ago you sent me an email from a friend who raised exactly that question, that she couldn't come to shul anymore on Rosh Hashanah because of all this talk about a king. And I think it's a major question. And we're going to deal with it. Leslie, I'm not going to deal with it now. That is a major question to deal with today, and we will deal with it on it separately. If we would have started this shiur in Elul, that would be my first topic. I start this shiur with girls studying in Midrasha in Yerushalayim. The school year starts in Elul. That's what I start the school year with. By the way, Ilana, I don't know if you know, I use your email to start the shiur. I tell them this is a true question. I didn't make up this question. And then we deal with the question, so we'll get to that later on. Then there is the question of different philosophical expressions of Emunah. The Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide of the Perplexed. As you said, Leslie, studying the Guide of the Perplexed leaves you perplexed. But nonetheless, there are philosophical proofs that the Rambam brings. Some of them speak to me to an extent, but I don't think that they do for me what they did for the Rambam. I think the Rambam, who was such a rationalist, through philosophical proofs, was sure that it's done. I have brought the final line, that's it, I've done it, brought the proof of Emunah. And I think at different periods in history, we think of it differently. And that wouldn't work today. So I think today we need something else, and that will connect. And it's fine that we have these different options. Yes, definitely study Moreh Nevuchim. I'm not making little of Moreh Nevuchim. I appreciate the book very much. It has helped me along in Emunah in many ways. Maybe I will mention them later on, not today, but in other shiurim later on. But I don't think it is that kind of philosophical proof is the most important thing for me today, and I don't think that would work with society today. Which brings us to the question, if we take the recording from today or from another shiur and send it out to the world, are we going to convince non-believers to become believers? Is this good food for our needs, for our challenges in Emunah, or can this be convincing for other people? And I would like to address this question later on. I will just say something short about it right now. And that is that I believe this is a process. I'd like to coin a slogan, okay? Trump lovers, you'll love this. Trump haters, ignore the connection to Trump. I want to say, make Emunah great again, okay? Meaning, what we have to strive for is a more spiritual, I was looking for this word 2 weeks ago also, a more abstract, that's it, a more abstract Emunah. I think that we have this difficulty, and sometimes people like to have very boxed in Emunah. Somebody makes it very small, and he proves it, and he brings this great speech, and people walk out, and they take kippot on the way out, and they put them on, and tzitzit, and they do tshuva. And I think that kind of proof is belittling Emunah. And that in today's world, we need to make Emunah great again. We need to make Emunah something greater than that, more abstract, more difficult to comprehend and cling onto, but higher and stronger in the long run. So that's why I'm not going for something that I think is immediately going to convince someone who's not a believer, but nonetheless, in the long run, I do believe that it will be important. I will quote Rabbi Sachs right now. Leslie, you sent me 2 weeks ago the discussion between Rabbi Sachs and, what was his name?
Richard Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins, thank you, yes. I watched the whole thing. It was more than an hour long. It was fascinating because that Monday, one of the girls in the Midrashan Yerushalayim mentioned to me the same video. She is actually from Ra'anana, one of the families in Shifteh. So, you know, clearly some people in Shifteh were connected to Rabbi Sachs in this video. And I watched the whole thing. It was very interesting. And one of the points that they make there is Dawkins says, I don't connect to anything that's not scientific. And you know, so don't ask me questions of why, I only ask questions of what. And one of Rabbi Sachs' points was, that's fine. Questions of what, that's what science is for. Religion is for questions of why. And science doesn't have answers to those questions, which also means I am not looking for a scientific answer to why. I'm not looking for scientific proof of why I live, of what are going to be the goals of my life. But that doesn't mean that they're not valuable because I don't have scientific proof. So these are all points that are going to accompany us as we move along. And I'd like to move on to a first proof, a first source that I'd like to study with you today. Before I do that, if anyone wants to react to any of the above comments about this being the abstractness of Emunah being a strength rather than a weakness, the question of is it frustrating or inspiring, and anything else. Bevakasha.
My comments are usually long. This comment is really short. I think proof and faith are opposites. If you prove something, you no longer need to have faith in it. It's done. If you have faith in something, you don't have to prove it.
I agree. The only thing I don't want that to be, Mark, is I don't want that to be an easy way out. Meaning, I think sometimes it's used as an easy way out. You know, I'm not looking for proof. I don't care that there are questions because I'm a believer. Faith is when I don't understand. I'll get to that. If we make it through 3 sources, I've prepared 3 sources in English today. If we have time, we'll go through the 3 of them. The third is Reb Nachman, and there I would like to discuss that point again. But I agree with you. It's very similar to the point I'm making. Proof means that it's something rational and it's not about faith. Faith is something else. Faith is in a sense deeper than science. It's something which is beyond the physical or the rational world, but then it's not provable, which is exactly the tension that we have here. But I don't want that to be an escape from making an effort. Since we can't prove it, so let's just have faith and move on. I want us to, I believe that we should make a very serious effort to work on our faith, even though we can't prove it. And that's why I agree with you, but I don't want it to be used in the wrong way.
Yeah, but the very fact that it cannot be proven means that one has to continue to struggle to understand. Once something is proven, you're done. It's a cooked thing. Now, I will say also, actually, that in science, proof doesn't exist in science either. And you have to continue to struggle, but it's a different kind of struggle.
Yeah, but I would say, I'll say something I was planning to say much later on. One of the strengths of science today, in contrast to science in the past long ago, was that science in the past was almost totally theory. That there was zero or very little proof. It was kind of, I always think of the Aristotle ideas about why the stars are not falling from the sky because of all kinds of circles that are holding them in place and things like that, and the sun going behind a certain barrier at night so we don't see it, and it comes out from a window on the other side again in the morning. These were all theories of trying to explain what we see with our eyes, but without any kind of serious basis. Science today is very powerfully based on facts and on findings and experience and experimenting. It's never perfect. It's never 100%. It never will be. It never can be. It can always be explored further. But I think that's why this issue is it's always been a challenge, but it's a unique challenge today because science has made such tremendous steps in basing itself on fact and experiment that people expect religion, expect religion to do the same, and religion hasn't moved forward like science. It's not me speaking, that's someone else speaking now, and therefore it projects religion as having a weakness. And also, I think people in the past understood religion as being in place because we don't have scientific explanations. There is an eclipse. Oh, the gods must be angry. And there is thunder. Oh, God's throwing his wrath at us. But now we know the eclipse is because of a certain relationship between the sun and the moon and so on. And thunder is because of something happening in the sky, lightning and clouds and all kinds of things. And if there is rain or isn't rain, isn't because the God is giving us blessing or not, it's because of all kinds of physical things happening. So people assumed that in the past religion was there because we didn't have explanations for what was going on. But now that we have much stronger and factual, proven up to a point, scientific explanations, we no longer need faith. We no longer need Emunah in some higher force. And I think it's also, again, Rabbi Sachs speaking about the relationship between taking science seriously and at the same time looking for what is beyond science and what is underneath science, what is creating science and so on. So, but I do think it's a unique challenge in our generations. Eliezer.
I just wanted, minus sort of point, I want to take exception of saying that science is what, whereas religion is what. A decent scientist wants to know why. I mean, to try to determine the physical measurements and things like that is not a very deep approach to science. And I think Rabbi Sachs actually was very knowledgeable in many aspects of science, because science can be a tool for religion, and it's not, but the only way it can be a tool is if people take it seriously as a tool.
So I'm just not sure I understand. So are you saying that you're expressing his statement in a different way or disagreeing with it?
No. Well, I thought it was Dawkins who said, Dawkins, I'm sorry, who tried to make that distinction. He might not have argued with it, but I would say that
Dawkins was saying, I think Dawkins.
I wouldn't make that distinction. I would say that scientists, especially now, I mean, like, for example, for the corona, they want to know why things are happening. They don't want to just measure.
But in the scientific sense, but not in the moral or religious sense, because those are not scientific.
That's right. There's a moral why and a physical why.
Okay, clearly. Okay, so let's move on. Yes, Avi.
Sorry, just one point regarding frustration and what was the opposite of frustration?
Inspiration.
Inspiration. I guess potentially it has to do with your experience in life, where you have come from, if you have suffered a lot in your life and you cannot find the answers, because we read on Yom Kippur a number of times, especially in Nila, 13 times we talk about, well, I think it's 13 times, we talk about God's 13 principle of Rachamim again and again. We talk in Tefillah every morning, we talk about God answering those who ask. We talk about God's kindness continuously. And yet, if we really look at history and what has happened, the Jewish people, I take many other people, the Syrians today, but have suffered immensely. and that it seems like what we are reading has been put there by people who have gone for it, they've decided to go for the inspirational side, and nothing else will part their course. They will go for it. And I'm not saying it could be simply that they are more knowledgeable than I am. I may not have the knowledge that they have, and that's why they are able to have such a strong emunah when clearly around us times are very, very hard and difficult. And I think for me personally, the frustration is when I daven every day, and especially when there is hard times, and especially my parents who went through the Holocaust. I think I'm going to have this frustration unless there's a revelation in my life. It's going to be a lifetime battle between me and my love with God. At times I have a flow of beautiful feelings, but they are very rare. And sometimes there's great anger. So frustration, as I said, is it maybe to do with your past experiences, or is it to do with your determination of deciding I'm going to go for one way, and I'm not going to let any negative thought get in my way?
Thank you, Avi. I would like to say, I'd like to say two things. One is that I'd like to create a certain sequence of our study. One about believing in the existence of something that I can't prove and find, and then about the issues of pain and suffering and bad things happening to good people and Shoah and so on. While you were speaking, I wrote down at least 4 or 5 different points to relate to that. If I go through them now, then that's the only thing we'll do tonight. So I'd rather leave that in the sequence. I will say clearly it has to do with experience, but also clearly it is not totally dependent on your experience, on any individual's experience. And different people have similar experiences and react in different ways. And I think I mentioned this in the first shiur. The Shoah, which you mentioned, which of course is the greatest challenge of this issue, caused some people to lose their faith and caused some people to regain their faith. Fascinating. So I don't think it proves one thing or another. I think it opens people to different things. It creates different reactions. And I still believe that we have freedom to try and influence our own reactions. Of course, it's different, and of course I can't be judgmental of someone who lost his faith in the Shoah. I can't even be judgmental of someone who lost his faith when his life was very comfortable, because who knows what's going on in his life and his personality. And we certainly react to things also based on our personal experiences. And I wrote down to mention later on one of the fascinating examples of this. But at the same time, I don't think that it's only subject to what our experiences are. And I think we also have the power and the freedom to choose our reactions to it. And Be'ezrat Hashem, that will be our next stage after this stage of trying to discuss what does it mean that we can't prove God's existence, and then go on to how God runs the world. Maybe even today we'll get to the beginning of that. Okay? Okay, so I'd like to go to an interesting source. Here we go. No, wrong one. You don't need to see that letter that I wrote to some other teacher. Where is it? Here it is. Right one. Okay. So the pasuk in Yeshayahu says the following. We have the pasuk here in Hebrew. I'd like to just take a quick look at the Hebrew, but focus on the English. The pasuk says, "El mi tedamyuni veshvet." To whom can you compare me that I should be equal? Says the Holy One. That's the first pasuk. And the second pasuk says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these." In Hebrew, it's mi bara eile. Who created this? Who created these? The whole world. And he mentions the stars and takes out their host by number. All of them he calls by name. Hashem can give name to each one of the stars, to each one of the amazing or endless number of stars, of planets in the world, and so on. Because of his great might and because he is strong in power, no one is missing. It always reminds me, this pasuk in Yeshayahu, which is saying you can't compare Hashem to anything. His greatness is more than anything else. It always reminds me of Adon Olam. When we say, I wrote this here in small letters, Vehu echad ve'en sheni le'amshil lo le'achbira. This is one translation I found in a Siddur earlier. He is one, it even works with a tune. He is one, there is none else. Alone, unique, beyond compare. See, it works with a tune. So he is one, there is none else. Alone, unique, beyond compare. You cannot compare anything to Hashem. But I'd like to focus on these words that I've stressed, that I've bolded. In Hebrew, mi bara eile. In English, who created these? We need the Hebrew to understand this passage. And here is a quote from the Zohar. I'm not going to read the Hebrew. You have the Hebrew there for those who want the Hebrew. Let's look at the English here. Rabbi Shimon said, Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, said to his son Elazar, what is these? In this pasuk in Yeshayahu, again, I need the pasuk in English. Lift up your eyes on high and see who created these. Who created these? What is these? And Rabbi Shimon answers the following answer. When the hidden of hidden wanted to be revealed, meaning God, who is the hidden of hidden, who cannot be seen, wanted to be revealed, he made one point. One point is the beginning of existence. In Kabbalah, it's like creating the beginning of something. Rather than infinity, something which is measurable, again, tangible, beginning to be tangible. He made one point. And it is called who, to begin the structure. The word in Hebrew, mi, who, it's a question mark. It's one point, but it's still not clear enough for us to comprehend. And he clothed himself in an honorable garment that illuminates and creates these. This idea of a garment is a very major idea in Kabbalah. God is so infinite, we cannot see him. He needs to wear a garment. I always think of the movies. Think of a movie about someone who became invisible. He drank a certain potion and he became invisible. How do you see that he's there? He wears clothing. He wears a garment, so you see that there's something there, and you see his shirt but no head. And you say, what's going on? And he speaks to you. He says, I'm invisible. But here I am. You see that I'm here. A garment is something that enables us to see that there is something there that we don't see, that we don't comprehend. Allow me to compare it to the sun. No, do not look directly at the sun, because you know that can damage your eyes very seriously. What would happen if we didn't have the atmosphere surrounding Earth? There could not be life on this planet because we would be burnt. We need the sun to get heat and light, but we need a garment surrounding us so that we will be protected from the powerful light and heat of the sun. So that's like a parable to what Hashem is, to what Rabbi Shimon here is saying in the Zohar about Hashem. Hashem has to wear a certain garment so that we can comprehend something, and it illuminates and creates these. These are the tangible, physical parts of creation. Who, question mark, created these, exclamation mark? Who, there's a question here which is greater than our comprehension. Created these, which is something we can comprehend, and that is clothing himself in a garment. Says the Zohar, the letters were joined together, and here I need the Hebrew. Mi bara eile. Who created these? The letters of mi and eile are joined together and were complete in the name Elohim. Look at the letters of the word mi, eile, and you see the name Elohim. So the Zohar is saying that Elohim is an expression of a combination of a question and a revelation, of a question, me, who, and an answer, something that is revealed to us, which is these. The world is created, that is eile, these, but hiding within this world, within these, is a who, is a question, a who with a question mark. You know, we also say that the word in Hebrew, olam, includes the letters ayin, lamed, and mem, which is ne'elam, something disappeared, something hidden. There's something hidden within the physical world. There's a question mark within what we comprehend. And then the Zohar continues and says, they sinned in the calf. They that sinned in the calf said in Sefer Shemot, when they made the golden calf, they say, Eile Elohecha Yisrael. These are your God, Israel. You notice the words? Eile Elohecha Yisrael. The golden calf is when we say Eile without me. When we say these without who. When we make an exclamation mark without a question mark. This is Jewish belief, says Rabbi Shimon in the Zohar. Jewish belief is that there is something that I can see, these, with an exclamation mark, but it also includes some things that I can't understand, and I have an open-ended question, me, who, with a question mark. That together is Elohim. And then the people that Rabbi Shimon was speaking to, says the Zohar, they cried and said, if we had come into the world only to hear this, that is sufficient. So I take from their tears that, wow, this is a major idea, that Jewish belief includes an exclamation mark and a question mark, something that we can understand and we can wrap our minds around it, and something that remains with a question mark. And if we let go of the question mark, then that becomes an idol. That becomes idol worshiping. If we think we have found God, this is your God, Israel. Eile Elohecha Yisrael. Uh-oh, we've lost it. Why have we lost it if we found Eile Elohecha Yisrael, if we've lost the question mark? Why have we lost our Emunah? I can move on to another source from Rav Kook, but beforehand, maybe you want to relate to that question, or what do you think about this Zohar? How do you react to this Zohar? I love the Zohar, but how do you react to the Zohar?
Well, it's interesting that Elohim has Elah first, and then has me afterwards. So you have to recognize what's going. You have to comprehend what's going on in nature first, and then you have the ability to recognize Hashem.
Interesting. So you go through what you do see to find what you can't see, but at the end you end up with a question mark because you can't find him.
So you reach a block, and then you have to, something like that. Well, it's kind of like, or you reach conclusion. It's kind of like what we talked about Avraham Avinu a few weeks ago. Really.
Uh-huh. And the whole idea of which is also Rambam mentions, you study science, you study the physical world, and through that you see, wow, who stands behind this world? Like you say about Avraham Avinu.
And I know this is talking about Elohim. This is talking about the universal name of God, as opposed to Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hashem.
Yeah, Yud Kei Vav Kei is even more profound.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to react to the Zohar or to answer the question of why, if we lose the me, the question mark, then we've lost our faith?
But then I have a question. If you have half of it, it's not your faith, but you still have gotten part of the thing, because Ele is also part of the name of God.
Monique is your name?
Yes.
Thank you. Very interesting, Monica. That will bring us to our next source, okay? That will mamash bring us to the next source in our study. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, so let's move on to the next source. And this time it's going to be Rav Kook. I keep on opening the wrong one. You don't need to see that letter to another teacher. Here we are. Okay, so let's move down to a source in Rav Kook. This is my translation. Any mistakes in the translation are either because of Google Translate or because of me. Worked on this. I love this piece of Rav Kook, but let's try and work through it. It's a bit difficult, but let's try to work through it. Says Rav Kook, the thought must always be refined, that it will be clear without slag. We're talking about Emunah, about faith. This is in Rav Kook's book called Orot, Lights. Try and hold on to lights, okay? Try and grab lights and put them in a box. Not so easy. yet you don't want to live without light. Maybe that's a parable to Emunah. So the thought about God, the thought about faith must always be refined, that it will be clear without slag. Don't bring it down, like I said before, like some people, I believe, try to prove Emunah and put it into a small box, and they only make it little. They're ridiculing Emunah, and it's going to be stepped all over because people are going to see it as something which is so silly, so unwise. And I'm putting it in a refined way. But our faith, our thought about God should be clear without slag. The essence of belief is in the greatness of the wholeness of the infinite. Okay, the essence of belief is in something infinite. Again, there's a question mark there. It's something that I cannot comprehend. The essence of belief is not in something that I can understand. It's about something which is infinite. If you say something about God, everything is what the soul is yearning to its origin above everything. All the names we use for God give but a small dark spark from the hidden light, which the soul longs for and says to it, Elohim. So Rav Kook is saying that everything we say about God is a yearning, is a longing. It's not a finding. And I find it very interesting. What does it mean that it's a yearning? The soul is yearning to its origin above everything. The way I understand this is the following. Think of a person who was given away by his biological parents for adoption, given up for adoption. And maybe he's told he's adopted, or he knows he's adopted. And before age 18, he is not exposed to who are his biological parents. And in the state of Israel, maybe in other countries as well, when he's 18, he is given the choice if he wants to open the file and see who are his biological parents. And I can understand if he doesn't want to, because he was raised by these wonderful people who adopted him. He loves them, he appreciates him, they gave him everything. And he's angry with his biological parents who gave him away, and he says, why in the world would I want to meet these cruel people who gave me away? But some other people react and say, of course I want to meet my biological parents, even though they gave me away. And maybe they had justified reasons, maybe even they didn't, but they are my biological parents. They are my origin, I want to meet them. So I think of yearning for God is yearning to its origin above everything. I'm looking for where did I come from? Who? Remember the who with the question mark? Who is my father? Or if you're a feminist, maybe it's your mother. Or it's neither, it's beyond both. But I'm looking for where did I come from? Where do I come from? What is my origin? This origin is above everything. I can't define it. I can't find it. It's a belief in the greatness of the wholeness of the infinite. But anything we can say about it, like calling God names, he is the merciful one, or I will call him Elohim, or Michael, I will call him Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, whatever, or I'll call him Adonai, or El Shaddai, or all these different words are just a small dark spark from the great light, which the soul longs for. And so the true faith, true Emunah, Rav Kook says, is a yearning, not a finding. And he continues and says, every definition of deity, did I pronounce that properly? Leads to heresy. Listen to those words. Definition of deity leads to heresy. The definition is spiritual idolatry. You can build a physical idol. You can read the prophet Yeshayahu ridiculing people who grow a tree, water the tree, then when the tree grows, they cut it down, use half of it for their what do you call it in the house, to heat up the house, for the you know, where you burn the logs to bring heat to your home. What is that called?
Firewood.
Fireplace.
Fireplace, thank you. You use half of the tree for a fireplace, the other half you build your God. So Yeshayahu is ridiculing this. But just like a physical idol is heresy, a rational, a intellectual definition is a spiritual idol. We don't know what God is. And if you say, I have found God, I will tell you what God is. I know God. God is, I have my list of definitions. This is how divine providence works. This is how reward and punishment works. This is ABC. You give a whole list of exactly, you've studied in yeshiva and you were taught exactly what God does. And you have answers. You have clear definitions of who God is and what God does. And you have the answers to all the questions. Rav Kook is saying that is spiritual idolatry. The definition of deity is heresy, leads to heresy, because it is the belief in the wholeness of the infinite. Now, Monique, going to back to your comment before, the ideas behind that of infinite greatness, besides that of infinite greatness, are explanations by which to reach the source of faith. We need these that we saw in the Zohar. We need definitions. We need ideas. These ideas are a ladder for us to be able to climb towards infinity. We can't only work with infinite greatness. We can't only live with believing in something which is infinite and we have nothing to say about it. We need something that we can work with. So we have these ideas that are less than infinite greatness, and these are explanations, these are ideas, these are tools by which to reach out to the source of faith. They are the king's garments. Rav Kook uses the same word, garments. In the Kabbalah, this is called levushim, because Rav Kook studied Kabbalah and used the word levushim. These are the king's garments. Now think of the following situation, says Rav Kook. And one who tore the king's garments also raises his hand against the king and is making himself worthy of a death sentence. Meaning, if you go up and you run up to the king with a knife, and the guards didn't stop you on time, and the bodyguards didn't catch you on time, and you reach the king and you cut his garment, and you tear his garment, they arrest you, they throw you into the dungeon, and they're going to put you on trial, and there's a very good chance that you will be sentenced to a death sentence. And then in your trial, you're going to say, what do you want? I didn't touch the king. The king wasn't even scratched. I never meant to scratch him. I only wanted to tear up the garments because the garments aren't pretty. I want to bring him nicer garments, or I wanted everyone to know that the garments are not the king. It's only the garments. Nonetheless, you might be putting yourself in a situation where you are going to get the death sentence. What is Rav Kook saying here? He's saying the garments are only garments. They are not the king, but they are very important. Don't make little of them. Sometimes you become, your questions are great. You are asking great questions. Your thoughts about faith are tremendous. You've grown. You're not a little kid anymore. And what they taught you as a child is just not good enough. You're growing. You have more questions, including, Avi, your questions about good and bad and suffering and so on. These are great questions. And these questions cause you to question, what I was shown as God, is it true? No, it's not true. Those are only the garments. But don't make little of the garments. Don't tear the garments apart and say, this is all narishkeit, it's nonsense. Throw it all out, tear it to pieces. Because without the garments, like with the sun, then we can't get the heat, we can't get the light, we can't get what we need to get from infinity. So we need the garments in order to connect, to try and connect, to yearn to connect to the infinity. And if we tear the king's garments, we are causing terrible damage. And if we think the garments are the king, that is spiritual idolatry. Okay, so this is the complex balance that we have to retain. And the Rav Kook continues to say the problem is that the thinking about the divine is fixed. I put in parentheses, set in its ways. Is that a way to put it? It's kind of closed off in a box. People have, this is the way we were taught for generations, so this is the divine. Rav Kook says that's wrong. These are thoughts of a certain generation about the divine, but we have questions. We have questions about that configuration of what divinity is, what deity is. That is a certain expression. That's a certain box. That's a certain framework, a certain definition of faith in certain generations. But we have new questions. We have questions that we need to ask, is this box really God, or is this a garment of God? And if we only think about this fixed definition of God as this is God himself, this is a spark from the flaw of making a statue and an image. Just like some people make physical statues, some people make intellectual statues of God, which we always have to be very careful about, and especially in a period of intelligence and wisdom. In the last couple of hundreds of years, there has been what's the word, a revolution of science, of technology. People have more time. People are much more intelligent than they were 200 or 300 years ago. A few hundred years ago, how many people in the world knew to read and write? What percentage of people went to school? Everybody was busy surviving, whether it was diseases or having enough food and water to live. So people were not, before the Enlightenment, most people were not intelligent. And you could control, and the church, whether it's the church or the shul, could control their thoughts and their beliefs and tell them that this is the right belief. And they weren't wise enough and intelligent enough to ask further questions. But since then, the world has become, we are in a period of intelligence and wisdom. And to keep the old God, the God of that fixed box from a few hundred years ago, to keep that God today and to present that understanding of God to humanity today and say, this is our God, this is what you should believe in. It's not going to work. It's a statue and an image, which is not, we have to be very careful about it, especially in a period of intelligence and wisdom, because if not, people are going to run away from us. They're just going to turn their backs on us. Similar, Leslie, to what you said before about the way the Rambam expressed himself, I would say here too, if some rabbis can fill a whole arena with people, with hundreds or thousands of people, and give this full of fire and speech and prove Emunah and so on, and people are really excited, and like I said before, they walk out and take a tzitzit and kippah on their way out. And I think what they've done is horrible, because they've fired up a certain small group of people, but if you go out with this to the world, you're presenting Judaism and Jewish belief in such a ridiculous, childish, primitive way. The world is going to turn its back on that. That's not going to work in the long run. Therefore, says Rav Kook in the last paragraph, the heresy in the time before redemption has the right to temporary existence in order to remove the fixed forms of thought about the root of life. Heresy exists today because it has a role. It has a role to push aside, to not accept these fixed forms of thought about God, about the root of life. And that is a good thing, to remove them and to accept a more deep, abstract understanding of our Emunah. Even our deeper, abstract understanding of our Emunah is only going to be a garment, but it's going to be a more refined garment than it was a few hundred years ago. So that's why heresy exists in our time. That's why we have questions and we have challenges, because we are intelligent and wise people. Not because we are heretics, not because we are don't ask questions, because we are wise and intelligent people. And if you show me a statue of God, I am going to rightly reject that. Are you going to be able to give me the perfect God, the perfect understanding of God? No, but it is a step in the direction of finding a more refined understanding of God. And that is so important. And that is, I would say, when I said before, make Emunah great again, that is why I believe this kind of study is very important. Because if we, and again, Leslie, going back to your question, is this going to convince people right away? I doubt it, non-believers. But if we can create a religious society that has such abstract and deep and lofty Emunah, I believe, or I hope, maybe it's only a hope, that in the long run, this can make an impression on modern, intelligent, wise, and the intelligent, wise, enlightened society today. Much better than if we go back to these fixed, lowly kinds of expressions of Emunah. That's just going to push people away. And finding a more refined, abstract, deeper understanding of Emunah has a chance of bringing the world to reconnect or to explore a new connection to something which we call God or a higher force. That is my hope. That is my goal in discussing this within this group, and hopefully sending out rays of light to being able to discuss this in the world. And I invite your reactions.
I have a question.
Please.
I'm trying to find the best way of asking it.
First of all, did you see what I meant, that your question was
Yes,
in the next? Yes, okay.
I did. Thank you. If you take the very, very extreme Haredim among the Jews, let's talk about our faith. They are in that situation where they have an image of God which goes back to centuries. And they don't allow the people to come into the science and to come into the modern knowledge. Nevertheless, it looks like they're having more and more people coming into their environment, interested in that, and I don't understand why.
It's a very interesting and complex phenomena. Sometimes there are people, I don't know the numbers to tell you, you know, I haven't performed an academic research, but there are people who move in the direction that you say, partially because the rejection of Emunah leaves people in such a void, and extreme liberalism. I am up to a point a liberal person, but extreme total liberalism that has no boundaries leaves people without any framework within which to live. And sometimes they find in the Haredi attitude something which is very clear, very structured, and that's perfect for them. And sometimes I've known people who have made that transition from extreme liberalism to religion and then found a balance, and then found a middle, or I don't like the word middle, but found a combination of the different values. On the other hand, I don't have numbers, but if you've heard of the organization called Hillel, not Beit Hillel, that's something else. There's a group of rabbis that my wife and I are part of called Beit Hillel. But this is Hillel is a movement for youngsters from the Haredi world who become non-religious, are rejected by their families.
Yes.
And their numbers are growing also, because you can't, there's a certain limit how much you can hide from the world. And they see the world and they have questions. And again, I don't want to make a generalization about the whole Haredi world, but certainly in some of the Haredi world, also in the Tzioni world, also in the non-religious world, sometimes you're not allowed to ask questions. You know, you can't be a heretic of heresy. You're not allowed to ask religious questions about it. Chas v'shalom, you might become about tshuva. So that, you know, that kind of reaction, that kind of attitude can exist everywhere. But also in the Haredi world, sometimes you're not allowed to ask questions. So some people grow up and grow into the framework and stop asking the questions. And some people don't stop asking the questions, and sometimes go in the other direction, to the other extreme. And they're extremely angry and frustrated that they weren't taught, they weren't given the education that we have today, the science that we have today, and things like that. And so, again, I don't know what's stronger, which current is stronger. And if I take it outside of the Haredi world, what influence will this have on the greater society? If the Haredim, I have this argument sometimes with Haredi rabbis, including the rabbi of Ra'anana, of Peretz, who argues with me about certain things. At least we used to argue in the past. We don't speak so much, and not that I refuse to speak with him if he speaks to me, but we don't spend time doing that. But he says to me, "You're too open." He actually told me, "You're not Reform." I have a hechsher from Rav Peretz that I'm not Reform. But he said to me, "But you're too open. And with everything going on in the world today, you have to build greater walls to protect us." And my reaction to that is, you make the walls bigger and bigger and bigger for a smaller and smaller and smaller section of society, that less and less people can live that way. And what about Am Yisrael? maybe you're going to protect your family. Maybe it will work. Maybe it won't, like those young people who end up leaving the Haredi world. But even if it works for your family and your yeshiva and your students, are you thinking of what Am Yisrael needs? Is this what Am Yisrael needs? Is this the light, going back to Rabbi Sachs, is this the light that Am Yisrael wants to project to the world? Rabbi Sachs' success is that he gave a light of intelligence, of discussing with science and not against science, of discussing with liberalism and not going totally 180 degrees against liberalism and so on. So what is going to bring a blessing to the world? So my opinion is that a more abstract emunah that does ask questions, that doesn't have definitive 100% answers, that understands that we have certain answers that are garments to lead us to higher thoughts, that this is a better, that this is something that at least, I believe it's better for the world in the long run. It will have a better effect in the long run. And even if I'm wrong, it is important for at least part of the world. And it's important that somebody has to talk about this and strengthen this in the world so that it will be an option that at least some of the world will be able to choose.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rabbi, I didn't get the last statement of Rav Kook there. That you were like, I think you quoted part of it. I wasn't quite sure what it meant there. The last
paragraph here.
The Heresy in the time for and then ... Has that what is that? It's like
meaning that look at Am Yisrael in history. There were always heretics. There were individuals who were heretics. But Am Yisrael was a nation that kept mitzvot. As a nation, we kept more mitzvot. We did more. We did less. Maybe we were never perfect. But as a nation, Am Yisrael kept on the light of Torah and mitzvot through the generations. And suddenly comes along enlightenment, and Am Yisrael in the 19th century and the 20th century, also in the Christian world, moved away from Emunah, moved away from clinging on to our belief in Torah and mitzvot. And there's a lot of heresy in the Jewish world. And Rav Kook is saying what we see is a process of cleansing the Emunah. It's not just negative. It's not only negative against Emunah. It exists. It comes about because we have not helped Emunah grow. I'll give you an example. You teach a kid you have a non-religious family that sends their child to a religious gan, a religious kindergarten. At age 4 or 5, 6, he grows up in a religious gan. He's taught stories about God. What can a 5-year-old understand about God? Please do not bring your 5-year-old grandchildren or children or whatever to this shiur. I don't want them to hear this shiur. It's too early for that. If my grandchildren, I have grandchildren who are 3 and 5 and 7 and so on, and if I start talking to them about this, it's just gonna not help them grow along with their garment of emunah, which is right for their age. So you teach a child in Gan about God, that he is good and he gives reward for people who do good and so on. And then this kid goes to a non-religious school. And when he's in high school or in college, he asks questions of a grown-up, an adult, about what he was taught in Gan, in kindergarten. And he says that was nonsense. Those religious people, their belief is stupid. It's primitive. In a sense, he's right. Because what he was taught in kindergarten for someone who is an adult is primitive, is silly, is childish. But the problem is not what he was taught in Gan. The problem is that he was not taught to grow with his emunah when he's 15 and 18 and 20 and 50 and 80, okay? So take this now from that example to the world. Until enlightenment, until the technological revolution that changed the world, people were not learned, were not intelligent, and then there comes along enlightenment, and people start asking questions that were not asked for centuries, for thousands of years. But instead of answering these questions, we tried to push them back and say, oy vey, don't ask these questions. So Rav Kook is saying these questions which created heresy are there to help us force our emunah to grow, to remove these fixed forms of thought, which are idolatry, which are a spiritual or intellectual form of idolatry, and help our emunah become more spiritual and more abstract. That is an important role of heresy. It's better to do it through studying a shiur in emunah than to do it through generations of heresy. I believe that if we don't do it through studying emunah, it ends up happening through heresy. Heresy is saying to us one of two things. Heresy can either be saying to us, oh, emunah is wrong, it's going to tear apart emunah, or it's saying to us, you are not explaining emunah well enough. We're not teaching emunah well enough, and that the result is heretics. But if we will teach emunah well enough, in order to teach emunah, we first have to study emunah. If we study and reach a higher level of emunah, then we will be able to teach our children and other people emunah in a way that will not create heresy. And that is the role of heresy in the world. Michael, did I answer your question?
I think so. Okay, so you have sort of heresy and idolatry are sort of like extremes in either direction, or sort of trying to reach a center equilibrium.
Yes, you're trying to reach something which is enough of a garment to give people a framework, a structure of emunah, which we need because we are human beings. We are limited. We need something within borders, within limits, within certain walls, barriers. But to understand that these are garments, and this is not God Himself. And so the heresy is, the extreme of heresy is helping us clean out these boxes so that we won't remain in these tiny little childish boxes, and we will at least help our boxes and emunah grow and become greater, so that the modern world will be able to take their spiritual sustenance from these broader projections of emunah in the world. That's our responsibility. That's our challenge.
Okay, sure.
And Avi, I know that I have not yet addressed the question of suffering. I have so much to say about it, but we will get to that slowly. I wanted to get to Reb Nachman. It's too late for tonight for Reb Nachman. We have another great piece in Reb Nachman about these thoughts, and then we can move on to suffering and why does that happen in the world. Any last comments, anyone? Avi.
Rabbi, I did just want to say that what doesn't help the situation is the fact that we have this Haredi community, who some of them seem to want to take us back to the Dark Ages. We have these people who live by learning Torah every single day, and they're supposed to represent the foremost leaders of understanding of God's wanting from us. And yet many of us feel that their heaviness and their restrictions and their way of seeing things is totally unmotivating. And it causes, I think, a lot of confusion amongst new generation of people who, if we look at history, Rambam's books were burnt once upon a time. The Ramchal's books were burnt once upon a time by great leaders. Every time it seems like we've only moved forward and somebody dared to do something that pulled away from their old dark thinking and ways of being. And yet again, we are scared, because if you go too far, there's that other side, Shabtai Svi. So there is this balance, but staying put and going back, I see all these, it makes it very confusing. Who's right? What is right? And somebody's trying to find faith. This isn't helping.
I really agree that we need to have a balance, like you said, between Shabtai Tzvi and between making some movement and not making such. Well, I don't know if Shabtai Tzvi was moving at all in the right direction, but sometimes we make too much movement and we fall over. I learned this from my daughter who dances. She taught me that when you dance, you have 2 feet. If 1 foot is flying, I'm not going to show you what I mean in a personal example, but if 1 foot is shooting forward in some graceful step of dance, and the other one is not rooted in the ground, then you're just going to fall over. So you have to have this balance that enables you to move, but not to fall over. So I agree, that's something very important. In some way, I believe that the extremes also create a certain balance, but it's not enough only to have the extremes. We have to have somebody, I always like to compare it to a pendulum. The pendulum is swinging between different extremes, but somebody has to, I believe that I want to be the one who's going to jump on the pendulum and hang on to it so that we will put some weight into the center so it will find the right point of balance. So that's why on the one hand, I believe we have to study these issues, but yes, we also have to be careful. And in that sense, like Rav Kook was saying, don't tear apart the garments of Emunah, even though that is not God, that is only the garments that enable us to connect to Emunah, but don't throw them out delicately, because otherwise you're going to lose Emunah. On the other hand, if you stay put, then Emunah is not going to have its place in the world. But it's, yes, it's complex. And again, I'm going to go back to Rabbi Sachs, who contrary to some people who present an Emunah that people are so turned off from, he can show an example of being so devoted and faithful to Jewish ethics and halakha, and at the same time being in a conversation with the modern world. I think it's such an important example. So we have to try and be part of those people that are part of that society, which is going to give a living example that, yes, it is possible to put these things together. Let me say the following. People are gradually dropping out, so let's put an end formally to the shiur before we're left alone. But again, like I did in the previous times, I don't have to go. So if anyone wants to continue, please feel comfortable to continue discussing. But formally, the shiur has ended. Thank you. I appreciate the comments and the reactions. I really invite them all the time. Also, in between shiurim, if you want to send an email or any other way of form of communication, and if you want to enhance and expand any one of the issues we discussed one-on-one in a way that we can be broader than, you don't want to take over the place in the shiur, so please feel free to contact me and we'll look for a way to do that. We'll find a way to do that. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to ask you a question, which may sound pretty stupid, but non, je crois pas.
I hear you, yes.
Sorry. I would like to ask you a question, which may sound pretty stupid, but that's about where I stand. You're talking about studying those questions. How do you study? What do you study? It's a stupid question, but I have no answers.
There are several different things that one can study. And I'm sure I don't know all of them. But you have to study. One thing to study is the vast multitude of Jewish sources, including Gemara and Halakha, because some of the points that you gather along the way to build your structure, your garment of Emunah, comes from those details. When Avi was asking before about suffering, I wrote down 4 or 5 different things that I want to say about that discussion. One of them is a discussion in the Gemara, not in a book of philosophy. And I think it makes a very important and significant point about these questions that we will discuss in the future. But that's on the one hand. On the other hand, every person finds that certain things speak to their soul or to their intelligence, to their rationale. For me, it includes the Rambam. Rav Kook is major. He didn't shy away from questions. He challenged the questions, and he just like we saw today, he says if you run away from the questions, they're just going to tear us apart. The questions are there because they are meant to help us grow. but I learned that from Rav Kook. Some of it is in Chassidut, some of it is in other Jewish thinkers. But some people don't like Rav Kook, they like Rav Soloveitchik, they like people like Chassidut, they like Reb Nachman. I take from Chassidut certain paragraphs, certain points, but it's not enough for my challenges, for my processes. But so you have to look around and read different things and look for different teachers and find what's right for you.
Okay, starting from where? Because it's huge. So you have to start from somewhere.
Start from, again, Rabbi Sachs is a good place to start from today, but also read books about, sometimes the original sources are difficult, and sometimes it's good to start with books about, a book about Rav Kook's thought, thinking, about Rav Soloveitchik, about certain Hasidic masters. See, if one of them seems to speak to you, try to go back to the source and study a compilation of his work himself, not someone writing about him.
Okay. Okay. That's a good start. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Erev Tov.
Erev Tov.
Laila Tov.
Leila Tov.
Yes, Eliezer.
We're talking at several, we're staying at Rachel's mother's for the time being because of she puts things, so we have a lot of time to talk together at the table. And we were wondering, Rav Sachs was certainly a very, very great man and wonderful person, but he did certain things that bother us. Every human being does, and like rewriting his book, to temper his encompassing other people.
Yes.
And do you have an
You're the
opinion?
second person who's raising this for me today. I saw this today in a certain email that someone in a group that was discussing things that we learned from Rabbi Sachs, someone raised that point as well.
So what was your reaction?
First of all, Rabbi Sachs is not the infinite God. He can make mistakes, and it is legitimate to criticize him. Maybe we should wait for next week to do that, at least to the end of the Shiva. But basically, it's okay to criticize and disagree with some decisions he made. On the other hand, it's always a question of where you draw the line, because he could have taken a stand on certain issues which would have turned certain parts of Am Yisrael away from him, and maybe certain parts of the world, and maybe he would gain on one front and lose on another front. Maybe his decision was right. One of the things he did is he encouraged people in different ways, even about things that he wasn't proactive about. For instance, women's leadership. One of the women that I read today told about a discussion with him in that sense, that asking him about women's leadership, and he said, you don't need the rabbis, just do it. The rabbis will come along eventually. So he said there are three crowns in Yahadut. There's Keter Torah, Keter Kehuna, Keter Malchut, the crown of kingship, the crown of Kehuna, and the crown of Torah. He said, this is questionable that women can't be the king. There's the Rambam that says that, but there are other sources. But women are not Kohanim. The Kehuna is decided by the father, not by the mother. And since Leslie is still here, and maybe some other women, so I'm saying, it's unfair to us, because you get to decide who's Jewish, to be the one who by whom we decide who's Jewish. We only get to be the one by whom we decide who's a Kohen. So, but anyhow, but he said that the crown of Torah is there. Anyone who wants to pick it up can pick it up. You want to study Torah, you want to be a Torah leader, that's up to you. So he said to the women, go ahead and do it. The rabbis will come along in the end. So, I can ask myself, I take a stand on women's Torah leadership more than Rabbi Sachs did. Okay, but I'm losing on other fronts because of that. That's my decision. These are my battles. Maybe I'm losing, maybe I could have an influence in a different way if I hadn't taken upon this battle. And this battle I take upon myself within certain boundaries, because even if I would want to do more about it, then I would be less influential because I would then I would be in some people's eyes Reform and not an open-minded Orthodox, and I would lose my influence. So it's always a balance of different pulls, and where do you draw the line? So I don't think I can say that he was wrong about his decisions. I can say he had to decide where he's focusing, what he's focusing on, what are going to be his battles, what are not going to be his battles, and he encouraged other people to be active in other battles that he chose that were not his battles. I think that's a legitimate decision. Yes, Leslie.
Can I just say, I lived in the UK, and when he came into office, and the first thing he did, or one of the first things he did, was he organized a study on women's roles within the synagogue, and it was shelved, along with a lot of other things, because he was between a rock and a hard place. He was always fighting the Haredi leadership, and he was always fine. And don't forget that the United Synagogue, although it's Orthodox, isn't really Orthodox. You belong, or many people aren't. You belong to the Orthodox so that you can be buried in the Orthodox synagogue. I mean, that's a cemetery. That's a well-known feature of in the UK. But as soon as he gave up his position as chief rabbi, you saw the other side of him. He came out with a lot more things which he did, which he told his real feelings about. So I think that, we judged him harshly when he was the chief rabbi, because there was a lot of things that weren't done the way that we would have liked to have seen. But as soon as he gave up his position, he was a different person altogether.
That's very interesting what you're saying, Leslie. Thank you.
At least that's our take on it. That's what we could see from it. But I mean, I know one of his daughters, Gila, and I can tell you she's a very feisty young lady, very, very, I say liberal in a very sort of like inverted commas. And this is what she's learned from her father.
Yes. And okay, I don't think it's okay if someone disagrees with him. That's certainly okay, but I don't think that I have the facts, even the facts, and certainly not the different considerations that he weighed in different directions to criticize his decision between those considerations. And I think it's legitimate to make those decisions, including today, and including some friends of mine who don't look down on me because of my positions or my actions, but don't do the same actions because they have other battles to fight, and that's okay. You can't do it all. No one person can, and so there are other important things to do. Take, for example, Rabbanei Tzohar in Israel. In Beit Hillel, we have men and women. Tzohar is only men. Now, if you ask me, the leaders, the people, the rabbis who are at the head of the movement of Tzohar would be fine with having women, but then they'd lose a few hundred, probably more than 50% of the rabbis of Tzohar. And what they wanted to do is to influence the rabbinate in the sense of the country, and they've done a tremendous job of doing that. And Beit Hillel has given a place for men and women, Torah scholars, to work together. So each one is doing his role, and they're both important. And Beit Hillel cannot do what Tzohar is doing, and Tzohar cannot do what Beit Hillel is doing. And each one has its place.
I've belonged to the Orthodox community intensely for about the last 25 years. And during that time, I can tell you that it's moved on tremendously, yes. I think, anyway, especially in respect to women.
I have to say, Rav Lichtenstein, Zichrono Livracha, said about the question of, he was asked, is Judaism, is it right to expect that it's moving along? He said, whether it's moving along very fast, too fast, or too slow, depends on how much movement you're expecting. Some people expect A, B, and C, and they see there's so much more, and they say, oh, you're going too fast. Some people expect X, Y, and Z, and the whole ABC, and so they say, oh, it's only going halfway, or it's not moving fast enough. So it's all a question of what you think or expect, and there isn't the right answer to this question. But certainly I agree with you. Not only is it moving, I would say, in things that are important to us, if we have common ground, the trend is moving in the direction that we believe in. Sometimes that's not enough, because some people are suffering. And they, it's great to say your grandchildren will grow up in a different world, but right now I'm here. What about my life? I understand that as individuals, but as a nation, as a world, as a society, it takes time for these things to happen. And not that we shouldn't be helping it along, but as you say, I also feel that it's moving, it's evolving, it's growing, and let's be optimistic and let's help it along.
Okay, I'm going. I've got a Daf Yomi page to study.
Oh, great. Good for you.
Laila
Thank you
Tov.
very much.
Toda Rabba. Thank you.
Laila Tov.
Laila
Laila
Tov.
Tov.